To prison for having tried to kill yourself.
Why do you think MPs voted against it?
I think they're so ill-informed, and they have visions of everyone
control.
Taking their grandma
It's control.
Tell me, is Switzerland covered with people queuing up outside the Dignitas house? Of course they're not.
But having said that, there will still be people, however good our palliative care is, who can't be helped in that way and do, I think, have a right to end their lives. And
I don't trust the people who can't get you a passport in 2 weeks to decide whether or not grandma gets to live.
Another episode, another taboo I'm covering. I think I've officially covered every taboo possible. Sex, homosexuality, death, biracial, interracial couples, you name it, I cover it. Is that something to be proud of? I don't know, but let's get into the show.
But what is grief? If not love, persevering.
Okay guys, you can probably tell from the montage and the title of today that we'll be covering euthanasia, assisted suicide, and its potentiality of it coming into UK law.
When you say you'll commit to a vote, are you talking about the next Parliament?
Oh yes, definitely. And I think Esther would agree with this. For people who are going through this or are likely to go through it in the next few months or next year, this matters hugely, and delay just prolongs the agony.
How do we feel about that? I'm sure it divides opinion. I'm sure it evokes strong emotional opinion. Leave into the comments what you think. Leave into the comments what you like and dislike. Comment, like, and subscribe. In order for this channel to grow, I will need your support. So support a brother out. And if you don't want to support a brother out, at least put into the comments why you don't. Okay? Don't just watch and leave. Please.
By a coincidence, to the day, the 8th anniversary of receiving a phone call here in Westminster that my father had been found dead in his garage. As you can see, I don't find this easy to talk about even after 8 years. But I've done so before, and I will do so today, not least because I know that he would have wanted me to, as somebody who'd always believed in a change of the law in assisted dying.
Okay, without further ado, let's get into the episode. So today's episode will be covering, like I said, euthanasia. What sparked it off? What has sparked this conversation about assisted suicide for the terminally ill? It was this viral story about the couple that went into these suicide pods and discuss their end of life treatment there. In the story, the writer discusses that Keir Starmer himself has said he's going to bring this to a vote. Bring this to something that he wants to bring to the attention of the audience. That vote will be with the British public, and be under no illusion if you're from the USA. This could be coming to you too. It's already in Oregon. It's already in Canada. They have used examples of Canada, Japan, Switzerland, and examples of how this test pilot works, and it can be put forward. Many people in the UK go to Switzerland to end their life. It costs apparently 10 to 20k.
£10,000, I was looking
20.
it up. 20.
20.
Okay.
However, many people say it's 20k. How do you feel about that? It is very shocking. Some people very much believe it's a positive, with impassioned cries for this to be something implemented to law, cause of ignorance and lack of knowledge of what is really going on and what it's really like to be a carer. I've never been a carer, but I've had caring responsibilities for people who have been on palliative care, I should say, and it can be a very traumatic experience, especially for those who have burdened with the most responsibility. Unfortunately, something I haven't been burdened with.
Why do you think MPs voted against it?
I think they're so ill-informed, and they have visions of everyone
control.
Taking their grandma
It's control.
Tell me, is Switzerland covered with people queuing up outside the Dignitas house? Of course they're not.
Where would you have preferred Andrew to end his life?
at home in our lovely, lovely house with my son Davy there, with all our dogs around us. All rescue, I might add, if anybody's listening.
However, if anyone's thinking about the viral story and what this pertains to the viral story, it's important to say that the creator of the suicide pod said that it was intended to be a peaceful, almost pain-free death, almost euphoric death is what he used. However, it was tried and used in prisons in the USA where they stated themselves that Pastor Jeff in fact stated that, my mate Pastor Jeff, that the experience rivaled something to be in a glorified gas chamber, the worst thing that he had ever seen, and can become torturous if there's a malfunction in the device.
Nobody wants to die losing their dignity, which is essentially what is going to happen to him. And yeah, I'm really scared.
Naturally, we want to hold on to the people we love right until the last possible moment.
Yeah.
Are you ready to, or would you be ready to say goodbye to Nick before then?
I think you're never going to be really ready. I'd much rather say goodbye and just accept that's going to happen. I am okay with that because I would rather he doesn't suffer or lose his dignity. And I would much rather that happens now than another month on of his decline.
As you can tell from these clips, the burden on the family, the burden on the person that's terminally ill is extremely high. They feel helpless, they feel powerless, and it's important to recognize this. The stories about the pros of assisted suicide, euthanasia are so strong and they're so gripping in terms of the compassion and the empathy that you want to provide to these people that are suffering. Often they feel ostracized, often the carers themselves are left with this incredible burden, this sense of tiredness, this sense of frustration. I can empathize a bit, but not fully, because again, I've never been fully burdened with it. And the people that are terminally ill, powerless, riddled and ridden of the strength that they once had, it's a tragic, tragic point.
I really know that I am at the end. I really am at the end, and I know that physically I am at the end. I ended up washing on that floor, sat in a chair, naked, which is not very dignified. And so for me, to have an option of just saying, this is a point when really I would really like to finish right now, and that's going to be much better. I don't want to live that way myself.
And to see how some of them express themselves, to see how some of them discuss their feelings of powerlessness is so touching and powerful. I don't want to trivialize it. However, there's an important point to make, that often these debates kind of reduce these people into economic levers.
You civilizationally switch things. Suddenly, medicine becomes also about ending life. And at the heart of my social theology, what motivates me is a profound belief that life is precious. And we have a responsibility as a community to help people, to stand by them, to accompany them, and to hold on to life as much as possible. In the wake of the Second World War, there was a great movement against death across the West. That's when you saw the death penalty being banned. That's when you saw campaigns against the bomb. And I worry that actually the West is moving a little bit in the other way at the moment, that whether it be the return of war or defense spending or this pressure for people to be able to end their lives early, it just seems almost as though death is coming back into fashion. And I think that's motivated in part by people being treated like economic units. There's all this language around, are you productive? Are you useful? Are you a burden on society? That's got to stop. At the heart of society is love of life and wanting to preserve it and hold on to it. And the moment that we civilizationally give up on that, I'm afraid I really do think we open the door to a great evil that we will struggle to control.
And the reason I put this point there is not to chastise and a counterpoint to that specific argument, just a general argument that people should be allowed to dispose of themselves when they no longer feel useful to society. I feel like too often in the space that we're in, it's a very neo-capitalistic view of life where people view themselves as some sort of complete economic resource, and once you can no longer be productive, you're useless. Surely life has more meaning than that. And that's the problem with this euthanasia, assisted suicide debate. It becomes so moralistic, so spiritual, becomes a definition of what life is itself. What is the meaning of life? Do human beings have the power to take life? And I do enjoy the argument that historian made. Normally I disagree with everything he says on Question Time, but you can see how far this branch of conversation has extended. And that is a clip from the 2024 Question Time. It's a very poignant issue in today's conversation.
I think more money should have been put into the NHS so we wouldn't be talking about this.
Or into palliative care, for example.
Yeah, life is precious. I've worked in the care sector and I've had to leave because it's unbearable to see. You don't have time to care for people because you're constantly shouted at, you need to get to this person, lack of funding, not even funding for one-to-one or basics. And this, if the Tory government would have funded the NHS and social care, we would not be talking about people taking their own lives, because life is precious.
There's also the counter-argument that we should focus more of our resources into palliative care, end-of-life care, and move away from a formula that is about just ending life, and we should be putting our resources and finances into end-of-life care.
So the issue of palliative care has come up a couple of times, and I just want to really emphasise that I don't think there has to be any division between much better palliative care, which we undoubtedly need in this country, and support for assisted dying, and that is something that I do support. But I recognise that, for example, in my own constituency, or in Brighton and Hove, there's a wonderful hospice, Martlet's, and it spends all its time trying to fundraise because there isn't enough money coming from government or from the Integrated Care Board. And so I think we have a wonderful movement in this country, the hospice movement, and it should be properly funded so that people aren't scared at the end of life. But having said that, there will still be people, however good our palliative care is, who can't be helped in that way and do, I think, have a right to end their lives.
There is the real argument, and the real argument, that is deeper than that. Much deeper than that. So much more deeper than that, than people realise, that palliative care is not often enough. And how much money can you put into that for those who have lost their mental faculty, those who have become vegetable states? Is palliative care just a delayed process for those people in those cases? Can you put enough money into it? It's not a question I have the answer to. You can put your answers to that in the comment section. It's just a question I'm posing.
To end their lives. And I absolutely take the point that the lady said here about, of course, some people can't afford to go to Dignitas. If they do go to Dignitas with a family member, then they face an absolutely awful situation with the family member when they come back, being potentially investigated and even potentially prosecuted. So it's a terrible situation for those people right now. How much?
Again, another big argument is the facing of prosecution if you were to go to Switzerland in regards to ending your life and going through the assisted suicide treatment over there. The potential prosecution is real. However, it's extremely unlikely. Extremely low percentage of people are criminalised.
Assisted suicide is a very rare offence in Britain. Less than 20 cases in a year cross the desk of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and almost none of them, very few of them, are prosecuted. Now, according to the campaigners, that's a sign the law isn't working. It's almost as though they want to see people prosecuted. Actually, it's a sign that the law is working as it should. The purpose of the criminal law isn't to haul us through the courts and put us behind bars. The purpose of the criminal law is to deter unacceptable social behaviour. And the law on assisted dying succeeds in doing just that. The law has the teeth to deter or to make anyone minded to assist a suicide think very carefully indeed about his or her motivation before doing so. But it also has the discretion and the flexibility to treat exceptional cases in an exceptional manner and not to prosecute.
That argument itself, that if you go to Switzerland, you will be criminalised, can work as a bit of a dog whistle for the pros for euthanasia/assisted suicide arguments. However, it's a possibility and it needs a conversation. I think so often with death, It's a conversation that doesn't happen enough, and it doesn't happen often enough. It's very scary for all of us. Me, myself, I have fears of dying too soon, fears of my friends dying, fears of my loved ones dying, fear of people dying suddenly without me having any sort of control over it. I'm a bit of a control freak. And being out of control really fears me. Fears me? Makes me afraid. And death is one of the most uncontrollable things of life. And it is difficult, and I think it's important that we put this into the public space to at least call out the dog whistle arguments and have real conversations about the effects it has on carers too, and whether they should have a say about that. David Lammy made an interesting and very poignant point about how end-of-life arguments often favour a particular group.
That's what my starting point is thinking of my mother, who died of ovarian cancer back in 2008. And I do worry a lot that the people I see advocating for this tend to be middle class, tend to have a lot of agency, are more on the secular end of the debate. I worry that someone like my mother might have felt a burden to her children. And I certainly have come across families in the constituency where there might have been pressure from children.
And when the woman here talks about people dying in agony,
my concern is the safeguards would have to be in place.
Now, I place this here is not as a classist argument or an argument against people that are from the middle class to divide us into classes. I don't believe in that, and I never really have. However, it's important to look at that and understand what are the agencies that are at play, how some people have more autonomy and agency over their own destiny, and how those who feel an economic burden to their families may be forced and pressured into ending their own life, going through this assisted suicide route. Again, many arguments have shown that people, when this law is implemented into common law in countries, it increases the rate of assisted suicides, which were often very low in those people that travelled out. Now, some of that is to do with there being actual statistics in the country for it. Some of it is to do with when you promote something, it increases its, I hate to say this about something that is as morbid as voluntary assisted suicide, but it increases attractability in the sense that it seems more tangible, it seems like more of an option. However, does that change the fact or negate from the fact that it increases the pressure of those old elderly people feeling like a burden? Yes. When I was writing the script for this, writing my notes for this, doing my research for this, I put that men would be the most likely to go through this route, as we view ourselves as often as providers, as carers, well, more providers I should say, and as useful tools in families. And if we felt that we lost that youth, I can imagine many men would go down this route. And it's by luck, maybe irony, maybe confirmation bias that many of the stories that you find online were of men going through this route. And I do worry about that conversation and that aspect of this conversation being missed out, that this can affect many men. And the most important point that David Lammy mentioned was the safeguards. If this was to extend to something like mental health,
you're going to be expensive and inconvenient at some point. You're probably that already. And you'll probably be expensive, inconvenient, and desperate at some point too. Highly probable. Most people have, many people have at least one episode of severe depression in their life. And severe depression will make you suicidal. That's one of its cardinal symptoms. And one of the accompanying thoughts that characterizes severe depression is everyone would be better off without me. And, you can think about that as self-pitying, and sometimes it is. That's usually accompanied by kind of delusional notions about how sad and hurt everyone will be at the funeral and how sorry they'll be for picking on you. And that's not depression. That's narcissistic neuroticism. Depression is accompanied by the genuine belief that you're pretty damn useless and everyone around you would be better off without you. And I'm sure many of you have thought that at some point in your life already. And are you so sure that you wouldn't have called up the friendly Trudeau government and had them give you a hand just at that point? I think it's 30,000 people we've already managed to dispense with in this country.
Lack of use in society's feelings of being a burden could force people down this route. And if it did extend to mental health, it could be extremely problematic. Now, there's many arguments for and against this. I'll leave you with questions. Do you trust doctors who themselves doctors say they don't feel entirely comfortable with the notion of the end of life being in their own hands? It should be left to the individual. Many doctors say that. Often there's a conversation that the doctor that makes your decision doesn't know you very well.
We're told, don't worry, there will be safeguards. And yes, there will be safeguards. And if you don't look too closely, they may look reassuring. But they suffer from two fundamental weaknesses. The first one is that they place doctors at the centre of the assessment process. They paint a picture of the family doctor, the person who has known the applicant for many years, who knows the applicant's family and circumstances well. It just isn't the case. In Oregon, the official reports show that for those who have died by physician-assisted suicide since 1998, the median length of the doctor-patient relationship was just 12 weeks. And that 12 weeks is on a scale of 0 to 35 years. Many of these people are receiving drugs from doctors who hardly know them.
There's also the argument is, do you trust your government to be the person or the group or the corporation in charge of your life? I don't know.
And it's the family, to the degree that anybody has the right to make that decision, it's the family that has the right and the responsibility. You know, now I'm not arguing for the propriety of, you know, your personal physician-aided opiate overdose. The devil's in the details all the time. But I don't trust the people who can't get you a passport in 2 weeks to decide whether or not grandma gets to live.
The UK's passport system's not too bad, but we've been in austerity. We've been in a recession since 2008, so that's about 16 years. 16 years of mismanagement, financial mismanagement. And I'm just worried about putting the life of the most vulnerable in those people's hands. It feels like a further extension of big government, neo-capitalism. If you're no longer useful, surely it's a mercy killing. I like that quote from Nietzsche that Jordan Peterson said.
We had a dog, Seiko, and near the end of his life, it was getting pretty hard for him to breathe. Every breath became an effort, and so we made the collective decision to have him put down. And we liked that dog quite a lot. He was a great relief to my daughter when she was sick, and so it was a pretty rough day when we had him put down, but it was the right thing to do. But he's a dog, you know. He wasn't grandma. And Nietzsche said, you know, you haven't lived long if you haven't seen that the compassionate hand sometimes kills.
Often you can be removed from life by the most compassionate hand. A wise man once said to me, the road to hell is paved with good intention. I don't mean to make this a very theological argument about the sanctity of life, and it is important to discuss it because it is most people's moral standpoint, but I don't want to just make it that argument. But I don't trust that decision in government's hands. But the truth of the matter is, whether you look at it from a legalistic point of view, a statistical point of view, a theological point of view, a Hippocratic oath point of view, there's truly no real answer. It's a very individual question. Is it just extreme circumstances? I don't genuinely know. However, it's important to say this, that the vote will be in our hands as a UK audience, as a UK public. There's a very big likelihood that this video doesn't do well because it's very targeted at the UK. So I do this just for the few people that will watch, and I hope that you recognize that the decision that you make needs to be based in a degree of logic, a degree of compassion, but also think about not your life, not your neighbor's life, but in a big picture point of view. Do you feel comfortable with doctors and governments being in charge of end-of-life care? Well, end-of-life assisted suicide care. It's not an answer. It's not a question I have an answer to. I leave it to you. I wish you guys all the best. Love making this for you. I'll be back next week. Peace out.
Unknown. I've never experienced loss because I've never had a loved one to lose. But what is grief, if not love persevering?